who wrote stories for this beautiful book. And in case it's your first event with us, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Stay at Home Festival. So this is a celebration of reading and writing. It's a way to combat loneliness, for us to connect with each other and also create community. So no matter who you are and whether you are a professional or novice, you're welcome. And also the Stay at Home Festival is completely free. So of course donations are welcome, but yes, the Stay at Home Festival, everything in the lineup is all free. So how will today work? I have some questions for our panel, specifically about their stories and also about the book. And there'll be some time at the end for you to ask some questions. So if you have anything that you want to ask, just put it in the Q&A box and I will make sure to answer that, to ask that to our panel at the end. So let's get to it. I'd love to introduce our panel. So we have Sareeta Domingo, and Sareeta is the author of If I Don't Have You, The Nearness of You. Her books for young adults are published under S.A. Domingo, including Love, A Secret Santa. She's contributed to publications including gal-dem, Ballad, Stylist and Token Magazine. We have Sarah Jafari, and Sarah Jafari is a British-Iranian author, editor based in London. On the side, she runs Token Magazine, which showcases writing and artwork by underrepresented writers and artists. She's contributed to I Will Not Be Erased, our stories about growing up as people of colour, and her debut novel, The Mismatch, will be published in summer this year. And we have Rowan Hissei Buchanan, and she is a Japanese, British, Chinese American writer. Her debut novel, Harmless Like You, won the Authors Club First Novel Award and Betty Trask Award. Her latest novel, Starling Days, was shortlisted for the Costa Novel Award. And we have Verazzo, and she's an author, writer, editor, and artist. She's a contributor to the best-selling anthology, The Good Immigrant, and her story, Bus Stop, was shortlisted for the Guardian Fourth Estate Bain Prize 2018. She was previously an editor for Wasafari and gal-dem. So let's get to it. That is our panel. So let's get to the book, Who's Loving You? Sareeta, I would love to ask you, so when you pick up this book, I've actually got my copy here, just look at this beauty, right? So when you pick up the book, the first thing that strikes you, you know, amongst like the color is the title, Who's Loving You? And I noticed as well, there isn't a question mark at the end of that, it's a statement. So I wanted to ask you, where did the idea for this title come from?
It was quite a journey. Naming a book is always like a bit of a weird thing for me, but it's kind of ended up that all my books for adults, at least, have had song titles. So The Nearness of You is like a jazz standard. If I Don't Have You is a Gregory Isaacs song. Who's Loving You is a Jackson 5 song. And so I think just on a very arbitrary level, that was part of it. I was just like, they all end in you, they're all songs. I love music. I kind of went with it on that level. But it just seemed appropriate because obviously this is a collection of love stories written by British women of colour. And part of the reason I wanted to put the project together is because there's still such a lack of stories about love and romance that feature people of colour, particularly in the UK. So it was kind of referencing that, I guess, and saying, you know, it shouldn't really be a question. It should just be that we're here, we're out here, we deserve to be portrayed in this way. So it was, yeah, kind of a combination of those two things.
No, brilliant, brilliant. Absolutely love that. So we've spoken about the title, and I want to ask, in terms of the process of selecting the stories, because I know that you said you wanted new voices, prize winners, like just an array of voices here, but how did you select these stories to be put in this book?
It was really a question of approaching the authors, and obviously then the stories came from that, but it was really just people whose work I admired, who I thought I could, you know, approach. A lot of them, you know, not everybody, not all of them were authors that I knew necessarily. But yeah, I just wanted to approach people who I admired, whose work I admired. That was really the first and kind of only criteria. Or people who you know, there are some people here in the collection like Kelechi and Amna Salim who hadn't necessarily written fiction, but who I just had a feeling would produce a great story. So, you know, that's kind of the reason that I approached them. But yeah, it was really just in terms of, you know, how the stories came together, it was just approaching these authors saying, I'd like you to write a love story. Are you up for it? And then going from there, really.
Brilliant, amazing. So now it would be great for you just to read us a little bit about a little bit from the book, the story that you've contributed, and also just if you could just give like a little blurb about what it's about, that'd be great as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So my story in the collection is called "The Waves Will Carry Us Back," and it's about two people who meet by coincidence. A migrant woman, as you'll see, washes up on the shore of a beach in Spain, and she's helped by a Black British surfer. He's been on a tour on holiday, and this is his last stop. He's out surfing early one morning, and he sees this boat full of migrants wash up on the beach. But the two characters kind of have a spark of connection, but obviously she's in quite dire straits at the time that they first meet, but they have a chance to meet again later on and see if they can act on that connection. But I'll just read a short bit from near the start of the story. And this is in Andre, the male character's point of view. And so the boat's just washed up. I glanced down to pick up my board, but looked back up because I heard a rumble, just a burst of one from a motor, before it cut off into silence again. The boat was closer, a dinghy I reckon you'd call it, nothing more than that. It was full though, completely full of tall, dark bodies, so similar to mine, but theirs bowed in dishevelled exhaustion. I stood staring as it coasted in, sneaking with a shh up to the shoreline. The people, men mainly, a couple of women, spoke to each other in hushed voices, but I could feel weary euphoria coming off them as they spilled out into the shallows, pulling the boat up with them. None of them seemed to see me. Their gazes were fixed over that rise in the beach, and they ran to it, fast and urgent in one mass, out of the water, onto the land, and gone. All of them except for her. She was the last one, and as she took a few steps on foal-like legs, she stumbled and folded silently onto the sand, her face pressed into it, turned towards me. She was stunning. Her hair was cropped close so that the rest of her features could triumph. The smoothest skin stretched over her cheekbones, contoured by the morning light. Her lips were shaped like my most precious wave, full like a pillow and pale against their surrounding dark. And her eyes, massive and brown and so staggeringly beautiful, there was no way I would ever forget them.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Thank you, thank you. So I want to talk to you a bit about this story. So there's one part in particular that I found very, very interesting, and I think is just talking about a very complex subject. So it's a part where Amina and Andre are out, and they're having a conversation about where they're from, and there's some tension there. And this is something that we don't often see in fiction, because it's like they're trying to find common ground, especially Andre, like, yeah, I'm from West Africa.
Yeah.
Like, I get you, I understand you. But from Amina's perspective, it's like, well, no, you don't really. Like, your home is London. Your family are from Sierra Leone, but they now are living in London. You've never been to Sierra Leone. I've left my home. I've had to leave that. And I just wanted to talk to you about that as a conversation. Like, how important was it for you to include that kind of like double perspective? Whereas perhaps maybe as an outsider, you would look and go, okay, right, there's these two people from West Africa, and they obviously got a lot in common. But how important was it for you to really uncover that nuance there?
It was important to me because particularly I was dealing with two characters who had a connection on a romantic level, and that's something that you can't necessarily explain or quantify, but I wanted both, well, particularly Andre's character, to kind of become aware of the reality of what Amina's character is facing. Because I guess I just wanted that acknowledged, because it's a situation where he could come across as a savior type character. And I wanted to show her agency and to show that she's facing a reality that's very different to his, even though they may have sort of background elements to their characters that are a commonality. What she's dealing with and what he's dealing with are two very different situations, and they come at one another from very different perspectives in terms of the possibility of their romance. So even though the story kind of, I don't really want to spoil it, but the title of the piece, for example, is something that Andre says, and he's a character who can have that level of faith, maybe because he doesn't come from the kind of situation that Amina's character is. So yeah, I kind of just wanted that to be acknowledged between the two of them, and also to ensure that the reader knows that she has agency herself.
No, brilliant. And I think that's, yeah, that comes across perfectly. No, thank you so much for answering those questions. And Sarah, I'd love to talk to you now. So it's going off from like a similar topic here, this idea of a home. And I just wanted to ask you just a bit about the perspective that Safi has in your story, because again, it's like her connection to home, to her motherland, to her mother's land, literally, is quite an intricate one, where a lot of people perhaps reading this book can really fall into themselves. Like, okay, right, well, I may not have been born here, or I'm from this culture, but there is a connection there. So can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was quite, I kind of wanted to explore kind of the idea of motherland, and that I think there's this perception that like when you enter your motherland, you'll automatically fall in love with it and kind of see yourself immediately. And there's kind of like a romanticization of like the motherland, I think. That I kind of wanted to explore. I mean, it's not based on my own experiences, because I'm quite different to Safi in that she had never been to Iran before. And to give context to the story, in the story, her mother dies and she goes to Iran for the funeral for the first time. And that's when she kind of meets her family for the first time and kind of sees the culture there. But yeah, I really wanted to kind of explore, just the idea of kind of being in, your motherland and not quite clicking with the culture there, or kind of not seeing the beauty. And it is through her romance with a man, Javod, in the story, that he kind of shows her the beauty of it, and that actually she has to work a bit harder to kind of see the beauty. But once she does, she kind of, sees it as another home for her as well. So yeah, that was quite important.
No, thank you. And I think that would be a lovely moment. If you could just read us a little bit from your story, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I'll read from the beginning. That feels like a nice place to start. Who are you when your mother dies? It had been 40 days. She could not believe every day would be like this. Her mother was dead, and this fact would always be true. It wasn't as though this fear hadn't been a reoccurring nightmare in Safi's dreams, or a source of anxiety she hadn't lamented to different NHS counsellors, who themselves were overworked, their minds on other things, never quite able to soothe her worries. But in those instances, her mother's death was in the future, when she was 80 or 90. Even then, the possibility made Safi's stomach churn and her appetite cease. Such thoughts about morality made her question her faith in God. Because if there was a God, why did the people you love have to be ripped away from you? Either by the decay of old age, or like her mother, who died suddenly in a car accident on the way back from a work conference. The last thing she had said aloud to her mum was a blur. She was already pronounced dead by the time Safi and her sister Mariam made their way to A&E. God didn't even allow her to say goodbye to the person she loved the most. And that is how Safi found herself here, in Tehran, in a cemetery much grander than those she had seen in England, her mother's face painted on a plaque quite beautifully, wearing the hijab she sporadically wore, the mole above her lip made bigger than it was, her lips thin, well-defined. She was an exaggerated version of herself, not quite the mother Safi knew. Yasmin Parsi. The words written on her gravestone were in Farsi. Safi had been taught the alphabet and elementary phrases by her mother later in life, when she had complained about only looking Iranian but knowing nothing of the culture or language. "You live here now," her mother had said. "I didn't think you'd want to learn 2 languages." She shrugged and gave her daughter a crinkled smile. But Safi was young then, so blamed her mother for not caring to divulge her culture, their culture. So after college, her mother began to teach her, but they did not visit Iran, so the teachings were not useful until now. A loving and pious mother, daughter, and sister. Not quite true on the pious part, but she had been good, and Safi felt strongly that if God did exist, surely goodness was what he appreciated the most. Relatives stood around Safi, murmuring prayers under their breath. She held her sister Mariam's hand tighter, despite the sweat that gathered between their hands. Mariam squeezed hers in return and leaned her head against Safi's shoulder. This is what it would be like now. She would have to be strong for her, even when she didn't want to be.
Thank you so much for that. It was absolutely beautiful. So I want to talk to you now a little bit about cultural education, because reading this story, you learn so much about just Iranian culture, and from the perspective, like from someone who has lived this, as opposed to, okay, you know, I've looked this up or Google has told me something. And I wanted, especially with the Iranian Revolution, the way that you wrote that section in particular, it was as though you're just having a conversation with somebody and they're telling you, right, this is what I went through. And this is the ups, this is the downs, this is it. It felt so true, it felt factual, but not historical. And I wanted to ask you, how important was that for you to do through your writing? Was it something that you were like, okay, from the get-go, I need to make sure I show this true representation so that my reader understands this? Was that something that you had from the get-go?
I think it wasn't my intention with this story necessarily, but it's similar for my novel as well, The Mismatch, in which you see a bit of the Iranian Revolution there as well. So I think it's so important to like Iran and how Iran is now. And I think as well, like there's always this perception like in the media about how Iran is. And I just think the history of like the Iranian Revolution, how it was before and how it is now, is just so important. So I really wanted to get that in the story. And I think that's something people are really surprised about, that before the Iranian Revolution, it was very like westernized and a bit like now in England, like people wore like mini skirts, you know, like it was very like similar image to what you would see kind of now. But then I also wanted to kind of balance it that like Iran is not like, just because now it's, you know, an Islamic country, it doesn't mean that it's, you know, so repressed and everyone's unhappy, which I think is also what you see in the media, that actually people are, which, like everyone else, having fun, like it's just a normal place, basically, is what I wanted to get across. And I think that was really important to me. I think it's important for a story set in Iran to kind of just give that background, because I guess people don't really know it often. Yeah.
Perfect. So you just said something there about, you know, like saying that people are the same. And I think this is an undercurrent with all of your stories. I know that, Sareeta, you say this in the introduction, just like, you know, we are people and we feel the same things. And Sarah, just when it came to like, Safi has this beautiful realization where like I'm calling them car dates. This is something that I was like, where this happened, and this is actually beautiful. But just to give you a bit of context, just because of like the culture, you couldn't like go on a date, you couldn't say, oh, I would love to take you out, you know, have a bit of flirting and that sort of stuff that we have like over here in the West. And the way to do it is that like traffic lights, you wind down your window and you have the opportunity to have that with each other. And I just thought that was such a stunning thing to include in the story. And, you know, you were just saying there that, you know, at the essence, we all feel the same thing. And I think, yeah, just that part in particular really showed that. And just kind of going off of that, it's as though Safi has this realization as you're reading, like as a reader, you're reading it and she's having this realization, which then makes you as a reader also have that realization. And was that something that was in your mind, that you're like, okay, I want the reader to be going with Safi with this, or is it just something that just happens?
Yeah, I think what I wanted, because I wanted to use the romance in a way that also like is a journey for her as well, like as a person. So I really wanted like throughout the story for like us to be kind of with her and kind of being like, yeah, this is a real culture shock. Like it's quite difficult here. Like I'm not sure. And kind of throughout the book for you to realize that like actually it's not too different from like England, for example. And I wanted to show that journey, kind of show that Javad is the person that takes her on that journey, because without him, because in the story, essentially, when she's with her family, she doesn't really go around Iran or like go to places that young people go to. She's just kind of sticking with like her grandma and like her aunties who are grieving. And it's through him, like they kind of have like an evening together where he kind of takes her around to the places that he likes to go to. And I wanted him to show her basically just the fun of Iran and kind of, yeah, and like what young people do. And actually she'll have that realization through him and through his eyes that actually it's a really fun place.
Brilliant. No, thank you there. Thank you so much. Verizon, I'd love to come to you next. Firstly, can you just read? Yeah, I don't want to give too much away. Yeah, you read something. And yeah, we can have a little chat about it.
Okay. Bear with me.
No problem.
I don't have a copy of the book, so I'm gonna try and read off like the PDF on my phone, but the font is tiny, so it might take me a while. So the context is that the characters have just met, seen each other for the first time, but they're in an online relationship. So they're seeing their faces for the first time as this section. It was a Monday when May finally asked to see me. Don't you have a camera, microphone, anything, she said. I had it all, but the thought made me nervous. I'm at work, I typed. It's probably best if I don't. Come on, dude, she said, exasperated. I'm not asking for much. I just want to check you're not, I don't know, some weirdo teen who likes perving on crying women or whatever. Oh, sorry, I just completely lost the page of this PDF.
That's okay. Do you wanna do some reading in a bit, and we talk?
Yeah, go on, we can have a chat.
Do that. So, can we talk a bit about Journal? So the company that June works for. So the concept of this is really interesting. I'd love you to talk about it a little bit. And also I wanted to know whether you were influenced at all by the way that we view social media, or perhaps the social media we wish we had. So if you could just talk to everybody about what Journal is and where the idea came from.
So Journal is a social media network in the story that everything erases at the end of the day. Like your posts disappear, your likes disappear, and the idea is that every day you start new, and it's like ripping out a page of a journal and starting a new day fresh, which I think is a really silly idea for social networking practice. But in fiction, it's quite like a romantic idea, I think. But also it's kind of like I think it prompts action amongst the characters, because it's like they have to, it's this real seize the day mentality of like, you have to make a move today because tomorrow it could all be gone. Which I guess is kind of what happens, is that one day, all the social media disappears, and if someone doesn't update anymore, there's nothing to go back to. I think like now, if you break up with someone, you can just sort of haunt yourself by like constantly going back to their social media and like looking at them and reminiscing of the times you had like a really nice brunch 2 years ago or something, because it's all there. But with Journal, that doesn't happen. It's like once it's done, which is just what happens with like real days, I suppose.
No, brilliant. Just the concept was just amazing. I think it is romanticized. If only we could live that way, and we could just kind of live like that. But I don't know, we're humans, we like to torture ourselves as well, so that also happened. But so I feel like we can't talk about long distance without talking about time and the concept of time. And in this story, you make something that seems so impossible actually quite tangible. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of your writing this story, how difficult was it to write something that was so realistic, so raw, and also delicate, but the concept of time, something that as humans we feel grounded in? We're like, right, okay, this is what time means, this is how time works, there's no ifs and buts about it. But how difficult was it to write this story, but then at its core, time isn't as it seems? And how did your process, how was that?
That's a really interesting question. To be honest, I didn't really think about it. I really enjoyed time travel stories, and I think the best time travel stories don't really explain how that works. And I think as like readers, we're really forgiving with stuff like that. We kind of just let stuff wash over our heads, especially with like sci-fi and things like that. So making it work was not it didn't really seem much of a feat. And I've got ADHD, so I feel like my whole concept of time is like warped anyway. Stuff that should take 5 minutes can take an hour, and stuff that should take an hour can take 10 minutes. So like time for me just feels like a very modern invention, I suppose. So yeah, I think that the way that time works in that story is how time kind of works in my brain. I think the difficult thing in writing that story was in the first draft, we had like specific dates in it. And that made it really difficult because then the pandemic hit, and then I was like, actually, like this, I don't know what the future's going to look like. This seems really difficult to now future cast. So in the second draft, we kind of made it just a 4-year vague gap. We didn't try and put like specific timelines to it. But I think that was really beneficial anyway, because I think that adds to like the airy fairy wistfulness of the time frames.
Definitely, no, it does. And yeah, I'd just love to talk to you about the ending. Yeah, definitely reading this story, I had to sit with it for a while, just in silence, kind of going, wow, okay, so this just happened. And you do something really interesting. So by the end of the story, you kind of shift the power to the reader. The reader ends up knowing more than the characters. And yeah, I want to say, was that something intentional? Did you want to give that power to the reader? Because you're sitting there, you're reading that and you're going, wow, okay, this is what's going to happen. But you don't in this book know that's going to happen. So was that something that you intentionally wanted to do? You wanted to kind of play with, like power play with the reader, or was it just a way to kind of carry the story?
Yeah, I like the idea of people getting to the end and then immediately going back to see what they missed. I find that really fun as a reader myself when stories do that. So it was like a challenge that I set myself to see if that was something I could do or something that was possible. Yeah, I don't know. It was interesting being inside May's head, and me knowing what was going to happen, knowing that sorry, not May, June's head. So us knowing me knowing what was going to happen, May knowing what was going to happen, and June not knowing anything. Like June's the most clueless character in the story, but it's from her perspective. And I really like that. That was quite fun for me to try and tease enough so that stuff would make sense for June and for the reader, while also like not trying to give the whole thing away too early. That was like a really fun but like quite hard task. So it's nice to hear that it was achieved, I think.
100%. I did exactly that. I went back and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm seeing all these signs are there and I missed them before. And yeah, certain phrases meant something completely different when you got to the end, and you kind of have to go back and revisit it. So yeah, you kind of go on this journey as a reader. Yeah, would you like to read a little bit?
Okay, I'm really gonna try. I've worked out the way I just phones are just so difficult. Bear with me.
Fine, no problem.
Okay, so yeah, as I said again, it's like their first time meeting or seeing each other's faces after having this like online communication for a bit. And we're just at the point where May has asked to see June's face for the first time. So, come on, dude, she said, exasperated. I'm not asking for much. I just want to check you're not, I don't know, some weirdo teen who likes perving on crying women or whatever. I looked around at the grey emptiness of my office, everything in shadow except my yellow desk chair and the computer screen. Nobody would catch me if I turned the camera on. I'd only be reported to myself. But I felt self-conscious. I rarely made an effort for work, making do with washing my face and oiling my braids. Who was there to see me after all? Now, as it turned out, there was May. I want to see who I'm speaking to, she said. Please. I nodded, not for her benefit, but to encourage myself. I requested to join her stream. Seeing my face pop up below hers startled me, and I began to preen automatically, straightening my top and tucking any loose braids back into their bun. May looked delighted, stared at me with the Bambi-eyed joy of a child who has just seen snow for the first time. Hello, June, she smiled. Hi, May, I said awkwardly, crossing my arms protectively over as much of my body as I could. As you can see, not some perv. Oh, I don't know about that, May said, smirking, her gaze lazily taking me in. I felt my cheeks go hot and was rattled to feel my stomach flutter nervously as I watched her watching me. So this is your office, she said. Yep. It's bigger than I imagined. You're imagining my office, I pondered aloud. I really like your braids, she said, ignoring me. I put a hand up tentatively towards my hair. Thanks, I can never decide if they suit me. They definitely, May began, but interrupted herself by yawning. You should sleep, I told her. This is late even for you. Worth it, to see your face though, she said dozily. Will you watch me? I always do, I told her. Keep your camera on this time, of course.
Beautiful, thank you so much. That was, that was amazing, thank you. Rowan, I'd love to talk to you a little bit now, if that's okay. Could you first read us a section?
Okay, so I was just going to read from the opening because that seemed the easiest thing to do. So this is No One is Lonely. Explain again. You're becoming an oven? Her mother asks. Her muddle, projected from the speaker, fills Fiona's flat. It has been a week since Fiona moved to the city. For so long, the place seemed part of a distant, mist-covered adulthood. Now she's here in a small, clean, barely furnished room. Fiona is multitasking. She balls her socks, rolling them together until only the toes poke out. They look like severed rabbit heads. If her mother were here, they'd be doing the task side by side, her mother wondering aloud if maybe her daughter is walking wrong. How does she wear through the socks so quickly? Fiona says, no, an oven writer. I'll write the things the ovens say, you know, like the one Miss Davies across the road has. The job is at a big kitchen goods manufacturer. Their ovens can detect a chicken's juiciness and know when precisely to crisp the skin. It's all AI. But it still needs humans to script the jokes. Is it just me, or is it getting toasty in here? The AI regurgitates these phrases. If you are roasting carrots, it says, happy hoppin', honey bun. But if you rewarm pizza for the third time, it inquires, how are you feeling, buddy? Can I interest you in 7 easy home recipes? Fiona continues, I'll come up with stuff that feels timely. So, if there's a dish on a popular show, then I find out how it's made, or, I don't know, festive stuff for the holidays. Apparently, the blender writer suggested an avocado milkshake when Mexico won the World Cup. Why do people want to be talked to all the time? I spent almost 20 years waiting for your father to shut up, and now I'm supposed to listen to my appliances? My boss says personality is a big ticket item. Fiona tries to repeat the phrasing the man had used as he leaned forward in his chair. His eyes were shadowed, but he'd seemed so certain of his truth. She'd envied the faith. Studies show it fosters brand loyalty, Fiona adds. Her mother doesn't say anything, so Fiona asks, you're happy for me? Of course. If you're happy, I'm happy. But you can come home anytime. Fiona is alone in this vast city, but she does not want to go home. Here, there's the feeling that something special might happen, although Fiona doesn't know yet what that could be. I'll stop there.
Perfect, thank you so much. So Rowan, can we talk about digital appliances? So it's like Alexa with many family members. There's talking blenders, talking ovens. And I just wanted to ask, in terms of creating this world, so these appliances were created to combat loneliness. You know, this idea that if silence doesn't exist, and if we can create a relationship with with everything around us, then perhaps we will feel less lonely. But then on the other side of the spectrum, existing in the same world is the invisibles, these parties where technology is forbidden. So you've got on one side, you've got people wanting more and more technology. Let's try and create relationships with technology. But then you've got on the other side, people that completely want to shun technology to really communicate with each other. I think it's, Scott says in the story, isn't the point of talking to people to get personal? And that really stood out to me because it was like, okay, well, what is loneliness? So in terms of creating these two worlds, how important was it to have these two polar opposites when telling a story about loneliness?
Thank you for asking that question, because that was so beautifully put. And I think I sort of felt my way towards the story rather than having that sort of overall wisdom to begin like that. But I think it's sort of something that was very important to me is the characters who work in this office writing the jokes for Ovens also go to those invisible parties and are unseen. And I think it was, for me, I think it's a very human thing to try to combat loneliness, especially in this age, by trying to be hyper visible and trying to reach out to people, but also being very afraid that the version of you that you've put out there is actually something to be ashamed of, that you will be shunned for it. So one of the sort of charm of the invisibles is, even though there's a risk that there is violence and it can't be recorded and you might not be able to call home, that you can go in your bad outfit and no one will take a picture of it and no one will know the dumb things that you've done or said. And I think this character is very much trying to figure out what connection means for her in various ways within that.
Thank you. And I also want to ask you about your influences. So what influenced you to write about this, about loneliness as a topic?
Okay. Well, I think I'm generally fascinated with loneliness in most of my work, and I don't know what that says about me. But in particular, I met someone actually who has this job for one of the big famous technology firms, and she does it in a particular language. And she was telling me, actually, the jokes in the different languages are different. They're not direct translations of each other. And that she watches video, like YouTube videos that people make of themselves reacting to the jokes that the device makes or asking it questions. And I was stunned by that, because I never thought that the writer, I never imagined that there was a writer. You do think, oh, Siri is making this joke, Alexa's making this joke, not a person in an office. It's like trying to think what would be funny to both 5-year-olds and 50-year-olds. And then the further step that the person behind the machine would be watching you back. And so that was really fascinating to me. And I sort of wanted to play with that and what it means when the person writing the joke starts wanting to be seen or reacted to.
Brilliant. Perfect, thank you. And just something that I thought was really, really interesting. So Fiona has this love interest with her boss, but he is never named. You don't know his name. He's only referred to as her boss. Why?
I think, Sareeta was so kind, including this very grumpy love story, I suppose, in the anthology. And I think it's because I was very interested in that power relationship. He's not only her boss, she's much younger than he is, but he's not explicitly evil. There's no, he hits on her and then panics and is like, you can report me. Because I didn't want, although there are many bosses who are truly abusive, I didn't want to write about that for this story. What I wanted to write about is someone who maybe is a nice guy, but who is still in that position, and that position is inextricable in some ways from her relationship to him, that he is that much older, that he is her boss, and that on some level he's telling her how to be in the world, first as an employee and then as a person. So she didn't grow up in the city, but he did, and he's telling her about the history of the city and how to be. And I think when I was probably like looking back on being young. I actually grew up in London, despite confused accent, but I moved to New York. And in some ways, this is sort of a mashup between London and New York for me. And I was thinking, what it means to be young and falling in love with the city as much as falling in love with the people in the city. And the power, I suppose the power differential between you and a place is always insurmountable. And how do you exist despite that?
Oh, brilliant. No, that makes complete sense. And I think as well, just as a reader reading it, because he almost feels anonymous in a weird way. So you don't connect to him in like a really intimate way. You're completely behind, it's like you're completely behind Fiona in the whole story, because you're kind of like, okay, this person exists, but I don't, it's amazing what a name can do and how much personality a name can give to a character. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for you all that I'd love for you to answer. So I know that for you all, writing stories as women of color and really shedding light on just how important an array of voices are is so, especially in the day and age that we are living in, and especially as, you know, perhaps growing up yourselves, you didn't see yourselves in fiction or even any sort of like creative arts. So I want to ask you, if you had to give advice to women of color that are wanting to share their stories, to create stories or create art that represent them, but perhaps feel bound by what the world wants or what they think the world wants, what would you say to them? Sareeta, can we come to you first?
Yeah, I think the key thing for any writer is to try and ignore that kind of pressure, which is obviously much easier said than done. And I think actually, well, for me at least, it becomes more difficult the further into your career you go. Those perceptions and pressures start to infect you in a way. But particularly for somebody starting out, I'd say it's the most important thing is to try and convey their story in the most authentic way that they can, without, as much as possible, without trying to consider those perceptions or even the audience, but to really be true to the narrative that they want to portray. I think if I've learned anything about publishing is that it thinks it knows what it wants, but it doesn't. And the minute somebody manages to break through with anything verging on originality, suddenly that's the thing everyone wants. So, and there's no way, it's so subjective, there's no real way of knowing what that thing would be. So I think the best approach is to just be true to your own narrative, to not feel that you have to portray things a certain way because of your background or any other perception that you think society might have of you as an artist, but to, yeah, try and stay authentic.
Stay authentic, brilliant. And Sarah, can we come to you next?
Yes, I think I would agree with Sareeta, really. I think if you're a new writer just starting out, because I work in publishing as well as an editor, so I think, and I'm an author as well, so I've got two perspectives, but I think just starting out and kind of knowing what you want to write and what kind of you don't want to write, and being quite strong so you don't get pushed in certain directions. Because I think then, like, when you get a literary agent, kind of keeping that in mind, and similarly when you get a publisher, like keeping that in mind. So I think you can get led in other directions if you are not sure yourself what you want to write, and like kind of what kind of story we want to write and what kind of author you want to be. Kind of, I think just keeping that in mind as you write. And I think, like as Sareeta was saying, like I think publishing especially, they want like originality. Like I think just try not to follow what other people say you should write, and kind of stay true to yourself. And just as like a side note as well, there are like really good organizations such as like Spread the Word that I would recommend to all new writers. They like offer like free courses or like really discounted courses, and they're really good for advice. So just using these opportunities that are out there can really help new writers, I think.
Thank you, that's really, really helpful. And Veronica, can we come to you as well?
Yeah, I probably echo what Sareeta and Sarah just said. I think for me, another thing that I found quite difficult to reckon with when I first started out is that a lot of my early writing opportunities came from BAME opportunities, like being part of the Good Immigrant, working with gal-dem. These are obviously like very kind of race-centered projects. And I struggled for a little while with kind of being parts of projects like that and then thinking that meant that race was the thing that I should be writing about, and kind of not understanding the balance that when you're applying for grants or jobs or opportunities that are specifically for BAME people, that those exist because we're trying to correct a massive disparity in the publishing industry, and that just because you are taking that opportunity doesn't mean that you just have to do race stuff. Like, you're getting that opportunity because the publishing industry has neglected to prioritize our voices for a long time. And so being in a project like Who's Loving You, where, you know, Sareeta was trying to correct that issue in the romance world, like, it's a very white world. But that doesn't mean that we have to write love stories about race. So yeah, just bearing in mind that you can take opportunities that are for ethnic authors without having to make that your whole thing as an author, and that's fine. Because it took me a long time to just be able to reckon with myself and be like, no, this is okay. Like, this isn't my problem. I didn't create this issue. It's fine.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that's a problem that a lot of people face. That they find that, okay, I've been given this opportunity, I know that I've gone through that, okay, I must write about this. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And Rowan, I know this is the hardest job here because you just had 3 people give advice, but yeah, is there anything that you would like to say as well?
I mean, first, would like to echo everything everyone else said. It was very wise. I think the thing I would say that has helped me personally is to create for yourself either sort of human community, which can be just your mate who you meet every 2 weeks and you sit in a cafe and you say, we're going to write, and then you just talk about her boyfriend, and that's fine, but you're in it together and you feel like, oh, I'm not alone, I'm not the one, I'm not the only one fighting this path, and having someone to bounce ideas off. Or when you get a rejection, because every single writer will at some point get a rejection, at least one, but probably more, that they'll tell you that and they'll say, no, but I'm so excited about your project, please keep pushing it. I would say that person in your life is incredibly important, and they don't have to be a super famous, well-connected person. They just have to be someone who shares enough of an overlapping artistic vision that you have interesting conversations. And sort of to back that up, sort of not back that particular friendship up, to add to that, I suppose, I find it helps to create paper or digital community in the sense of having books that you imagine would be the community of your book, whether that's because you write in fragments and you want people who are writing in fragments, or if it is because you want other mixed race writers. When I was in my sort of late teens, early 20s, I had a huge bookshelf, not huge actually, it wasn't as huge as I would like, of mixed race writers, that every time I saw a book by a mixed race writer, I was like, okay, I have to find a way to get this book and like have it and know that these people exist. And that felt really important to me. And it made me feel like there was space for my work. And it could be about race, but it could also just be if you're plowing a stylistic road that you are like, does anyone care? But look at the books that you love that are in that sort of space and go, I love them, someone else will. But yeah, I guess that would be my advice.
That's great to end on. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of the session. I feel like I could ask you questions all day. Honestly, I could. As you probably can tell, I absolutely loved book. I thought was absolutely beautiful. This has just been absolutely fantastic. I think you're all such incredible, talented, relevant, important voices. These stories are needed. They are really, really needed. And you know, if there's danger in a single story, then you've shown there's freedom and space for authentic representation. Sareeta, Sarah, Vridzo, Rowan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your openness. And also just thank you for gracing the world with the art that you're doing.
And I
honestly,
just say thank you so much
amazing.
for your questions were really excellent. I really liked how you engaged with our stories because I've done quite a lot of events and these are really, really great questions. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who has tuned in and watched this. Hope you enjoyed it. And be sure to go onto the Stay at Home website and check out just the array of events we've got: workshops, panels, readings, talks, running until the 9th of May. There's so much wonderful things. I hope you have a lovely rest of your Sunday. And again, thank you so much to this brilliant panel. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.